All right. So today I'm going to talk about yet another board. This one is the Dygma Raise. This is the first version. Nowadays you can only get version number 2. And this is a keyboard that I actually was able to get secondhand for 120 bucks, which turned out to be a great deal. There's a few things to like about this keyboard, but the main thing that you'll notice when you plug it in is that this guy really lights up as a Christmas tree. Takes a small bit, but then boom, a lot of light comes out of it. This keyboard has a lot of properties, one of which is that it's also something you can split. There you go. But the real front and center thing that you're going to see is that it looks really flashy, and it does. Some people might be attracted to it. I'm not necessarily too attracted to it, but there are still some really cool features about this board that I do want to discuss. I do feel like I got to start with the light stuff though, like there is a lot of light coming out of this guy. But as you can see quite clearly from here, it's not just the keycaps themselves that push out a lot of light. You can also see that there's like a light bar at the bottom over here. This is an extra I think you do have to pay for if you're interested in that. When I initially got this, I was actually a little bit put off because it felt like it was going to be a big distraction. But one thing that's interesting as you maybe program this keyboard is that you can change every single light under each keycap, but you can also change every light on this keyboard in general. So one thing you might want to do is if you're switching layers, maybe for some shortcuts, you can also change the light that not just comes out of the keys, but also the light over here on this little neuron that plugs into everything. But you can also change the light of the glow under. And I can imagine in some situations that that gives just a little bit more light. That also helps you understand where you are in your layer, so to say. So still a bit flashy for my taste, but it is functional. Which was a pleasant surprise. It was definitely more functional than I initially thought. Now, before diving into the software that comes with this, so there's a company called Dygma behind this that also makes custom software for these keyboards that make it pretty configurable. But when you buy this, it is my impression that you also get this carrying case. My impression is that you don't have to pay extra for this carrying case, but it does come with a couple of, I think, pretty cool goodies. Like you get there's some standard stuff in here, like a key puller, and there are also some extra cables, but one thing that I thought was just kind of a nice touch is they also add a bunch of switches, so that if you're interested in trying some stuff out, they give you extra switches so you can also play around. There's also a little brush that helps you keep the keyboard clean and stuff, but you do also get a carrying case, which not every keyboard does, and if you're traveling, this is actually something you might really want. So, right, that's all well and good. I think before diving into the software, what I would like to do first is maybe discuss just the keyboard layout, because there's a few things that are just kind of interesting here. As you can hopefully see, there's not a single spacebar here. The keyboard is split, so you would expect that there's a button for the thumb here and a button for the thumb there. But this keyboard is designed in such a way that each thumb can comfortably reach 4 buttons in total. So you've got 2 buttons on the top over here. I'm just going to kind of press it together because it might be easier to show. But you can see that there are 4 buttons over here, which span the space of a normal spacebar, but then there are also 4 buttons below here. And the interesting thing is that these buttons are also a fair bit lower. I was wondering why initially, but one thing I did notice is the fact that those buttons are lower makes it much easier for your thumb to just feel where the thumb is. It's pretty clear that you're touching another button over here, and that makes navigating a whole lot easier if you're just staring at the screen. Like you can actually feel around in a tactile way. And the way that they designed this was also just kind of interesting. And to show you that, I gotta unplug the keyboard for a bit. So as you can see here, you'll notice that there are some normal switches on top here. Those are the normal switches that you get. But below that are different kinds of switches. These are known as chalk switches, and the ones that I've got here are clicky switches. So not only are the switches looking different, in my case they also sound different. But one key characteristic of these chalk switches is they're also lower profile. So if I put the keycaps back on again and then push it to the side, you can definitely see that this chalk switch has way less travel in it. And this one has it's not just higher, but it also travels for more. So that's how they were able to get a nice tactile feeling and make a distinction between those buttons. And also by having it lower, because your thumb can kind of travel, There's also just a little bit more space for your thumb to kind of go. Like if my hand is on the home row here and I sort of show you where my thumb is, it's very comfortable just resting here. And it's very easy to sort of reach these other 3 buttons as well. And it's a bit of an effort to go inside, but this button is pretty easy to reach too. So I would argue 6 buttons for me are really comfortable to reach, and the other 2 for the thumbs are relatively easy to reach. But suddenly, your 2 strongest fingers have a fair amount of buttons to access, and that really opens up a lot of doors in terms of configuration and also, frankly, just easy use. And that might also be a nice little segue in terms of configuration. So I would like to talk about how I configured this keyboard now. This is, by the way, Bazecor. This is the software that they provide for this keyboard. Everything's plugged in, so I can just hit connect here. And then here you see the keyboard as is with all the colors and all the settings that I've added. If you've seen any of my other videos, then it will probably not be a huge surprise that I have these home row modifications here. F can also be shift. You can really configure a different letter quite easily by just clicking a different letter from the interface below here. But you can also add a dual function by clicking below here and saying, look, I want to turn this into a dual shift button. And this will then also mean that if you keep it pressed down, that it then triggers a modifier. You can also have it trigger a layer. There's lots of stuff that you could theoretically do here. But home row mods, that's the first thing I configured. The spacebar that's split, one of the buttons is still the spacebar. The other button that I have over here is basically a layer switch. And you can see that very clearly from the keyboard, like the colors change. And when I click that, I go into layer 2, which is my modification layer. From here, there's a couple of things that I basically just added. I'm still sort of playing around with it. But on top here, you've got your play, pause, volume up, down, all that good stuff is up here. I've also got a little arrow cluster, so I can move the cursor a bit from here. And what I've also got here are these brackets. So if from here I were to press T, that would be open bracket. If I were to press G, that would be open square bracket, and the closing brackets are on this side as well. Stuff that's not too surprising, I hope. On my base configuration, by the way, caps lock is turned into a backspace, and when the mod layer is pressed, that gets turned into a delete. So, you know, the spacebar and a mod layer, those are the bread and butter of this keyboard. But the buttons on the bottom here, that's where I basically put all sorts of shortcuts that just trigger stuff that I'm usually really interested in using on my Mac. So just to give an example, and I'll probably make a separate video for this, I have this app called Home Row, which allows me to just click a shortcut, or in my case, a button. And then everything that's clickable gets a keyboard shortcut. So instead of using the mouse, I can now just select the thing I'm interested in. So you might notice that over here on top, if I want to click this, I have to type DF. And that now simulates a mouse click. This is such a useful app that I do like to use it all the time. And that's why one of the buttons below here is associated with that. Another button that I've got here is set to, I believe is called Raycast. It's similar to Alfred, that's also an app I'm trying out. But it's basically a quick command palette for your operating system. So if I want to toggle full screen or toggle left, that's something I can configure from here. It's basically just a little command line thing that I can do operating system stuff with. The same Home Row app that I mentioned also has a scroll functionality, so I can click this shortcut, and that will then turn my arrow keys into something that can scroll. So that is now also something I can quite easily do here. And scrolling is something I tend to do a whole lot. And then finally, the rightmost thumb cluster at the bottom, that is something I can use to switch windows from the same app. Command backtick, I think, is the shortcut for that on Mac, but I also use that all the time when I'm switching VS Code windows. So that's also a button that I've just configured. I can click that, and then within the same app, I switch. So to me, that's kind of the main use case of those lower buttons. They're just really nice, quick key presses that prevent me from doing like kind of finger acrobatics to hit the right shortcut. So that's definitely a nice feature. Stuff I use all the time, that's the stuff I tend to put there. There's also some other stuff that I've added, like there's a mouse layer as well, so I can move the mouse layer around. I will say the experience for the mouse isn't the best. I find it quite hard to configure very fine-grained movement with it. I might need to play around with the settings some more, but yeah, that's like not a huge deal breaker, but it would be nice if the mouse was just a little bit nicer to control. It feels like you can only control it by making very discrete jumps, but it still has like a mouse layer in here, so you can still control the mouse, so that's still pretty neat. But one thing I thought was kind of also interesting, not just the stuff we've got in the middle for your thumb here, but there's also something really interesting happening over here with the Shift, Control, Alt, and Function on the right-hand side. Because I'm using home row modifications, I tend to not really need those buttons. But I did start to look at it and figured, hey, what if we've got like an arrow key cluster over here? The Shift button over here is, really, really big. But if I just pretend that that's like the up arrow button, then I do have a left and right and down button arrow here. And hey, yeah, suddenly I've got my trusty little arrow cluster over here, if I really wanted to. From an ergonomics perspective, I do think it's way better to maybe stay closer to the home row and use the modifier key. But I have found if you're like trying to learn this new keyboard layout and the whole split thing, you might actually miss the arrow cluster the most first. And given that that's not really a twist hand movement, it's definitely more of a move the palm and your entire hand around movement, I have found this to be kind of comfortable. And the fact that you could actually configure that, as you can see here in Bazecor, like it's just the arrow buttons, that was actually just kind of nice. So if you're learning a new keyboard layout, like this is something that could actually kind of help. The fact that you were able to configure that was definitely kind of cool. Now, finally, because Enter is mapped to a different key and Backspace as well, I was kind of wondering what to do with these keys. And I just put Caps Lock here, just in case. And what I've done to the Backspace, that's a button I rarely press now because Backspace is on Caps Lock, but I did figure why not. I could add like the screenshot shortcut there. That's like a thing I could do. Jury's still out if that's like something I want to do here or if I want to use a macro pad instead. But still, like, the main point here is that this is stuff that you can go ahead and configure. Now, if you make a change to the layout here, you can just hit this Save Changes button and it's flashed automatically, so that's definitely nice and convenient. One thing you can do from here as well, which is a beta feature, but you can configure this thing that are known as super keys. So what you can do here is you can configure a key where there's behavior if you tap it once, there's behavior if you hold it down, there's behavior if you tap it and then hold it down, and double tap, and there's like 5 things that you could configure per key by doing this. I haven't used this a whole lot because you do have to go into a different menu to configure this, and most of the stuff that I'm interested in are like mod layers, so I didn't really have the need for this. But this is a beta feature that you can try out. It might be useful if you have a specific use case. It does open up the doors to like more flexibility. There's also this macro editor where you should be able to chain keyboard shortcuts together. There's also this thing that you should be able to do with like typing text. So if you have a bit of text that you type all the time, you should also be able to add snippets here. So that's also kind of nice. And finally, a thing that's also just kind of good to mention is that you are always also able to go into the nitty-gritty details and change some of the sort of more hardcore preferences. So you can make a backup on your file system if you're interested. You can change the language. You can change the LED settings. There's all sorts of timing things that you can configure here. So the software itself is pretty complete. The only thing I do want to maybe mention is that I have found that there are bugs, but they are infrequent enough that I could just totally ignore it. It feels like maybe once every 3 weeks or so, there's a weird hiccup, and you can just easily solve it by plugging and unplugging it. If you go to their Reddit, like Dygma does customer support via email and Reddit, then you do see a lot more complaints about people who are using Bluetooth. In my experience, keeping it wired is always preferable to Bluetooth. It's great if Bluetooth works, but I really don't mind if my gear is wired. So that's a little bit of mileage that can vary. Keep that in mind. They do seem to be trying to be on top of it, but it can be a little bit buggy, maybe more buggy than I've seen with any of the other boards. But I have been able to manage just fine by just plugging in and out again. And it's never really failed me fully. It's been like pretty minor and pretty easy to ignore. So yeah, in summary, this is the Dygma Raise. It is a likable keyboard, although it is a bit flashy. I wouldn't mind if it was maybe a bit less of that. If you go onto YouTube, you also kind of see that flashy nature in their marketing appear, but the design is solid. It's nice to be able to configure a key cluster below here. That was definitely cool. To have a lot of buttons be comfortably reachable for your thumbs is also definitely kind of cool. If you're going to go online and order one, though, it is an expensive board. Most of these Ergo keyboards are, but I do think that there's stuff to like. I've not really had any big issues with this keyboard. You are going to have to figure out if you want to have a row staggered keyboard or maybe like an ortholinear one, but if you're in the market for something that is row staggered, this is a solid experience.